drama with our front shocks is going to have to wait till next week before we resolve that. I just put the strut all back together with the rubber bushing. It's back in there with its original threaded collar and the original spring and bump stop and everything. And one thing we can do today is address our speed sensor, vehicle speed sensor that we talked about before. These are the two wires. Now normally these would go to the transmission, which is right behind the engine, and that's kind of the length that they are. Our transmission's in the back of this car, so we are going to have to do some jumperizing. Well, not jumperizing, but we got a couple of wires we're going to extend and run along the bottom of the car to the back. The sprocket gets mounted to the or reluctor, whatever you want to call it. It's mounted to these bolts that hold that CV joint to the transaxle. So it's in two pieces, so you take 3 bolts out, slide the thing in, put 3 bolts in, spin it 180 degrees, take 3 bolts out, put the thing in there, and put the 3 bolts back in. And our vehicle speed sensor, I believe, mounts to 2 of these bolts on the transaxle. So that should be easy enough. Here's our vehicle speed sensor. We got our pigtail in the mail, so we're ready to go with that. Little demonstration of the speed sensor here. We can do that. We can do a demonstration of the speed sensor. I have it connected to my ohm meter here, and as you can see, it's reading 1945 right now. If we take a half of the reluctor wheel and run it along close to, oops, a little too close to the sensor, you can see it changes. Oops. It's got a big magnet in it, so it wants to draw the reluctor wheel right to it, like that. But yeah, that's how it works. This spins, and this reads it, and that makes a voltage that the computer can read. All right, enough of that. Couple of wiring tips here. I like to do, when you're doing something like that, I like to cut about 1 inch off each wire, tin them with solder, and then bend them into a J shape. Then you slide don't forget to slide the heat shrink over it before you solder the two together. So you end up with two J's. You hook them together, and then you squish them with a pair of pliers, and you solder them together, and you slide the heat shrink over, and you have a really good connection that will most likely never ever fail. So that's what I like to do on these automotive projects. And another tip is cut one wire shorter than the other. So that way when they're heat shrunk all together, they're not rubbing right against each other where the heat shrink might eventually fail. Probably not, but it's just a good safety idea. That way, when they're heat shrunk together, it's this going to the factory insulation, and that's not going to be a problem. All right, let's get soldering. All right, so now we have like a 6-foot pigtail for our vehicle speed sensor. And now it's time to figure out that's long enough. I don't know if it's going to be or not. I hope so, but it's got a, you've got to make it a safe routing. So it'll have to probably go through some places to get it up out of the way of the suspension and all that stuff. So it might not be enough. And we're going to cover it with some of this braided stuff, and it'll get zip tied to probably the brake line underneath the car so it stays nice and stable. All right, we've moved to the under the car portion of the job. And as you can see, we have our reluctor wheel mounted in there. We pulled each one of those bolts out, pulled out these reinforcing gadgets and just replaced them with the reluctor wheel. And we pulled the top bolt and the one to the right of it out, and that's what's going to mount our speed sensor. And just a quick measurement here, the distance from about where that thing is in the car to 6 feet is only going to bring it right to there, and that's kind of close. This is our wires that need to get connected to, naturally not outside of the car. So I think what we're going to do is J-hook what's left of, there we go, that's a longer one. We'll take this longer brown and white out of here and we'll J-hook it onto here, just like we did with this pigtail. I mean, I just don't want to have to be making this connection while I'm under the car. I'd rather do it here on the bench, cover all the wires up, bolt it on the car, and then we just have to make that one connection at the front. All right, we've got our J-hook extensions on. We've got the end that's going to connect to the Atomic LS all ready to be J-hooked, stripped, cut unevenly like we like to do when they're going right next to each other, and tinned, all ready for J-hooks. Next, we got to stick it in the sheathing, and we'll nail this all in there, and we'll move up to the front of the car and get these wires run down to wherever they're going and connect them to those wires. Alrighty, we are almost there. Got the sensor mounted in there. Bring it there. I got lucky. It's right next to the fuel pump wiring, so I just ran it along the fuel pump wiring and up through the tunnel and zip tied it to where the fuel pump wire was run, and comes out here and goes up behind the fender cover where the brake lines go. And comes out of this hole somewhere. Well, it comes out of that hole. I don't see it, but it's there somewhere. It comes around to this port. And these are speed sensor wires. Now, next thing we got to do is fire it up. I believe you drive it for 40 miles an hour for, here's the instructions right here. Calibrate speed. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, program the calibration, drive 40 miles per hour on an open road to maintain speed. Once at 40 miles per hour, select yes on the handheld. This will calibrate the speed input. This option will also enable speedometer reading on the handheld. Yeah, so right now it just reads 0 for the speed. So, I'm thinking what we could probably do is, since we have it up in the air, we can just start it up like this and, you know, drive it at 40 miles per hour standing up in the air and hit the calibrate speed. See how that works. Well, that was pretty easy. Put it in third gear here, let the clutch out. There you go. Speed is reading 40 miles an hour like this and hit calibrate speed yes, and that's what we got. 39, 40. We're at about 40 on the speedo, so we're good. I forgot about that. Pumping on the brakes here. When I pulled the caliper off to do the strut, you know, you pry the pistons back, and I forgot that you have to hit the brakes after that, because it takes a little bit to push, takes some fluid to push the pads back out again. So, okay, we should be good to go for a ride now. Well, our little drive didn't go all that well. It didn't really make much difference in the bucking. And then I happened to notice that the speed that the Atomic LS handheld was showing was like wrong. So I drove to 40 miles an hour again and recalibrated it and drove around, and it just started kind of going all over the place. It wasn't anywhere near accurate. So what I'm thinking might be the problem is that there isn't really a way to set the distance between the reluctor wheel and the sensor. So what I'm going to do is take the sensor off, bend this bracket down this way, and put it back on again. We'll see how that works then. Well, unfortunately, that all didn't work out too well. For some reason, that speed sensor doesn't seem to like this fuel injection system. I don't know if it's just that this fuel injection system isn't compatible with that sensor and reluctor wheel, or if our added wire length is just introducing noise into the system that it can't deal with. So yeah, we'll be figuring that out later. But the important thing is we're just going to drive it anyway because we can. And as far as the front shocks go, I think probably what I'm going to do, since we're probably not going to be able to get, you know, 2 matching front conies, probably just going to call ground control tomorrow, since we have their camber plates, which includes the whole top of the strut. Maybe they can sell us just the ground control shock part, which would be nice because it's double adjustable and it's a lot stronger than the factory shock or the Coney shock. So we'll see if we can do that. I mean, I shied away from doing that because it was so expensive, but it's really so expensive because it comes as the whole assembly. And if I can keep my front springs that I already have and keep the camber plates that I already have, and they just are selling me the basically what would go on there if you wore out one of their shocks, that might be pretty reasonable. So hey, more on that tomorrow. But hey, we're just going to drive it the way it is for this week.